G'day, my name is Seeds. I'm recording this on First Nations land, and this is How Do I Find the Black Market? An interview podcast series where I chat to my mum, Gail, about her incredible travel adventures from her youth. Welcome, Mum.
Thank you for having me.
How exciting.
Very excited, very excited.
So I guess what brought this on is the idea that you planted this seed in my brain since I was very little about the importance of traveling. And, you always said to me about traveling. What's your memories of that when you were telling me about getting me to, trying to inspire me for a life of travel?
I was very distressed at one stage because you said to me, I don't want to travel overseas. I want to see Australia first. And I'm saying, no, you don't. You really need to go overseas and then see Australia.
And where was that coming from, do you think?
I don't know whether I just told you too many tales of what I got up to that might have upset you or turned you off.
Too many disastrous travel stories.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Great. Well, just so you know, it did inspire me, and I have enjoyed lots of overseas travel. And one of the reasons why I want to record these stories is so that it inspires your grandkids to do the same. So take me right back to the beginning. When you're a little girl, what was life like in terms of travel, the prospect of travel? Where did you go for travel and holidays? And did you ever imagine that you'd be traveling all of these incredible places as you grew up?
Not at all. We used to go to the entrance for our holidays because my auntie had a job up there and my parents used to babysit my cousins. So we'd go up there and it was a very old-fashioned house. There were bunk beds. The shower was just a bucket over a bath, and there were water restrictions, so we could only have half a bucket of water shower. And then the plug would be put in and the last person just had to have a tepid sponge.
So who got the tepid sponge?
The youngest one.
The youngest. And at that time, that's Auntie Jan, is that right?
No, my brother Peter.
There you go. Okay, and so do you think he resents that?
I don't know. But it was amazing holiday because it was very much a routine. We'd wake up in the morning, go down to the bars, swim, have a chocolate paddle pop as a reward, and then we'd come home and we'd have prawns and ham and tank bread. That's what we lived on. Very cheap holiday.
Right. Where did the prawns come from?
Well, that was part of the excitement. We went out in the middle of the night into the entrance channel. My father used to put us on his back and swim us over the channel onto the sandbar, and we'd stay up half the night prawning, which I loved. I loved being up in the middle of the night. And poor Jan, my sister, she hated it. And she'd take her book with her and try and sit on the edge reading a book by torchlight. Because when you go prawning, you only go in the dark, so there's no moon.
So tell me, jump back. So your dad's swimming you across the channel with you on his back. How deep's the channel? Can he touch the bottom? Is he actually swimming?
I think he probably could touch the bottom, but to me, as a little girl, it was just he was swimming us across.
Wow! And how old were you?
Probably 5 or 6 from
Right.
then onwards. Yeah.
And so Jan's a few years younger than you.
Yes.
And Peter, did he go as well?
He went as well. He was just a little baby, and Nanny used to sit on the beach and just look after him at night.
Right. And so talk me through the actual prawning. So you're over on the sandbank.
And
What was the process?
it was in the days where the prawns were running. That was the terminology you used. And you just have a prawn net in front of you and hold it and just go from side to side, just catching prawns. There was none of this, just 1 or 2 prawns. So they'd come down in 20 or 30 in one swarm. Well, I don't know what you'd call it.
A
Not
school?
a swarm, a school.
Yeah.
A school.
Great. So the prawns are running. You're there. How long are you out for?
Probably a few hours. And there used to be a carnival up at the entrance, and there was a Ferris wheel. And I can always remember looking across to the Ferris wheel, and the Beatles were playing Norwegian Wood as the Ferris wheel went round and round. And Jan said, I want to go on the Ferris wheel, and Nanny and Pop Granddad would say, no, 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 we've got a prawn, because this is what we lived on. So if we didn't get enough prawns, I don't know what we'd do.
You
We'd
wouldn't
just
be
have
eating.
ham and tank bread.
So, how many kilos are you getting a night?
Many, many kilos, probably 20 kilos, I would think. And we had to cook them in a baby bath because there was no pots, no saucepans big enough. So Granddad would make a fire on the beach and fill up the baby bath with salt water, put all the prawns in and cook them until they turned pink, and then we'd pack up and go home.
Wow. And what time would you be getting home?
Probably about 3 in the morning,
Wow.
I'd say. But that meant we had to have a sleep during the afternoon. And the other thing that happened was there was a thing called pelican itch. So we were covered from neck to toes with our clothes on and our sand shoes so that we didn't get this lice from the pelicans and get the itch.
Right. And did you ever, is that another horrible story? Did you ever get the itch, or were you okay? You remember?
I didn't, but poor Granddad did.
Oh, right.
And he went to the chemist in those days and got a bottle of, it was brown liquid called Friar's Balsam. So he covered his legs and his chest in Friar's Balsam. But he did this when we were down at the pool, and he sat down and crossed his legs. Well, the Friar's Balsam stuck. And so his legs were stuck together, and he had to try and pull them apart.
It was very excruciating because it pulled a lot of the hairs out of his legs.
So that was your early holiday memories at the entrance.
That was right.
And when did the idea of travelling the world creep into your worldview?
It wasn't my idea. My friend from nursing, Yvonne, she and her partner were going overseas, and they said, "Why don't you come with us?" This is after we'd finished our nursing training, and I said, "Why not?" So the three of us bought tickets to go on a ship. That was the cheapest way of getting over to Europe in those days. And Yvonne and Ray pulled out at the last minute, so I was there by myself. And I can just remember standing on the ship. And in those days, we had streamers, and you'd throw the streamers over to the people on the dock. And also, the other thing was you could have visitors come on board. So I got on the ship, and Nanny and Granddad came, waved goodbye to me, and then threw the streamers, and off I went, all by myself.
So, just take us back. So, what year are we talking about here?
This was in 1974, after I'd finished my nursing training.
Okay, so how old are you?
I was 23.
Right.
Yeah, 22, 23.
22 or 23. So you've done 3 or 4 years of nursing training,
Yes.
living on the quarters.
Yes, and
right?
then I moved into a flat.
Yeah. And your best friends said, yes, let's go over on this trip with a partner. And then they've pulled out. How last minute is pulling out at the last minute?
Probably about 2 months.
2 months beforehand. How? Give me an idea. How early did you buy the tickets? Like, what's your lead-in time?
We had probably about 6 months.
6 months. Yeah,
and that
beforehand.
was planning and talking about it.
Right. Right. So up until that point, what's the furthest that you'd been away from, Sydney or the entrance?
After we'd been to the entrance for holidays, we did go to Rainbow Bay for a few years. That was in Queensland, just over the border, and that was as far as I'd been. We hadn't been to the snow, hadn't been on an aeroplane.
Had you been on a big ship like that before?
Not at all, only the ferry.
Right. To get into town or something like that.
Yeah.
So we've got, they've convinced you to come on this thing. You've said, yes, okay, let's do it. Was there any pressure to not go? Because, you just finished your nursing training. Is there any pressure to get straight into the workforce or anything like that?
No, I just thought, why not do it? Just, continue.
There's nothing from the nursing training that says you've got to get started or anything like
No.
that? Nanny and Granddad didn't have any pushback saying, what are you doing?
No, they were quite happy to let me just travel. There wasn't a lot of, because there was no internet and there was no mobile phones anything like that. It was just, just get on a ship and go overseas and
Well, that was going
write
to
a
be my next
letter.
question. So how did you get your tickets? Like, what's the actual process? Your friends convinced you to go. What do you do?
There was a travel agent that we booked through.
Mm-hmm. And do you remember that process? Do you sitting down? Did they give you a brochure or something, or
I think
were you just going along You were just going along.
my friend Yvonne had organised all of that, so I think she just went to the travel agent and booked everything, and I just handed over the money. I don't even remember going with it.
Great.
I just thought, yep, she's doing it. I'll just go with her.
And when you booked the ticket, did you know about where you were heading to? Had she spoken to you about all the destinations on the trip?
I think we just were going to go on the ship and then work it out from there. There was no great plan
Great.
as such.
So where did the ship dock?
It went to Genoa and
So
also
in
Naples.
Australia?
In Sydney.
Sydney Harbour.
And it was an Italian ship called the Marconi, and it was its last voyage because it was a very old ship and it was going to be scrapped
Right.
after we left.
Right. So the last legs of this ship, you go, great, we'll catch the last ship over to Europe.
Correct.
And where were you going to travel to? Where was the docking overseas?
Well, it docked in Genoa and Naples, but I did have
Italy.
Yes.
Right.
I did have a contact because during the war, this chap Rex had come out from England. He was a soldier, and he was billeted to my mother, to her family, for his days off. In those days, you'd take on a soldier just to show them around Sydney and to look after them, and his name was Rex. So, Mum had spoken to him and through letter writing, and said, my daughter's thinking of coming overseas. Is it all right if she comes and stays with you? So that was the reason, I think, why they weren't too concerned about my safety, because in their head they knew that I was going to go and stay with Rex and his family.
So at some point you were going to go and catch up with this guy who hadn't seen for a number of years, who they'd written just been corresponding with letters, and they said, jump on this boat, the last voyage it will ever take,
Yes.
on your own,
Yes.
head off overseas, see you later.
Absolutely.
And was there any talk about how long you were going to be gone for, or any other plans other than the fact that you were docking in Naples, at some point you'd go to London to catch up with this Rex?
I had saved up my return fare, which was in the Bank of New South Wales in those days, which I think is now Westpac.
Right.
So in that bank, I had a return fare to get back to Sydney.
Right. And so that's you just in case. You said, if I don't like it, or whatever happens, I'll jump on the flight and get home.
Yes.
And so how much money had you saved up? Did you get paid while you were doing your nurse's training?
I did get paid. It was $54 a fortnight in the early days. I can't remember how much at the end when I finished. But I did do some...
But it wasn't a full wage?
No, it was like an apprenticeship.
Yeah.
Yes. But I did, after I finished, I worked for an agency called Gordon Agency, and I used to go into hospitals or nursing homes, and the pay was very good. I can't remember how much now, but that helped me save quite a bit of money, to get extra money to...
So before you headed off, do you have any recollection of what your bank balance was? What was your money that you were heading over?
It was
there
only
with?
a few $100s.
Which in those days, give me a bit of, how many weeks worth of wage would you have?
Oh, probably quite a few months.
Right. So you had a fair bit of money.
I had a fair bit of money behind me, and I also wrote and registered with the English Nurses Board, and I was going to work over there.
How do you organise that?
Well, way back in the 70s, the system was if you had a grandparent that was of British heritage, you didn't need a visa. You could work and get your Medicare, or the equivalent of Medicare, for free. And So I took my grandmother on my mother's side, her name was Nana Scarlett, Margaret Scarlett. She was from England, so she, through her, I was able to get a visa and work over there, and I didn't have to worry. I could have stayed and worked
If you
forever.
wanted to.
Yeah.
I'm just curious about the process. Like these days, if you need a visa, you Google, how do I get a visa for England? And you read the rules. Do you have any memory about how you actually applied for it or organised any of that? Was that through the travel agent or was it?
No, I think I just applied to the embassy, the Australian embassy, to get, and I still have the original passport where I've got this stamp saying that I'm of English heritage. Yes.
Great. So you're there, what was it, 76, did you say?
74.
1974. So you've thrown the streamers off to your parents.
Yes.
See you later. I'm going on this ship. How are you feeling?
I was quite excited. There were a family, or there were parents of someone I went to Chatswood High School with. They were English and they were going back to England for 12 months. So there was somebody on the ship that I actually knew.
Great.
So, but I was excited, and I think I was very naive. And the whole time I was away, yes, I think I was just naive. I don't know what I thought was going to happen.
And describe for me the trip. How long did it take? What were your living quarters like? What did you do on the boat to keep yourself going?
It was 5 weeks on the boat, and there was a lot of young people. There was also a lot of Italian families going back with a lot of young children. During the day, we'd just sit round the pool and stay up at night listening to the band. I remember I got sick at one stage and I wasn't going to go and see the doctor because it was going to cost $3.85 to see the doctor. And that was just too much money.
So right from the onset, you had a bit of frugalness about you.
Absolutely.
In terms of what you're going to spend money on, what you're prioritising money on.
Absolutely.
And was it expensive to go on, like, do you remember, was your food included, drinks included, stuff like that? Or did you have to buy things?
Everything was included except your drinks. You had to pay for any shore excursions, but usually when we called into a port of call on the way over, there'd be a group of us and we'd all hire a car and travel round and see all the sights, and so it was a lot cheaper.
So it sounds like a lot of fun, the trip over there.
It was, and everyone it was really joyous sort of time. Everyone was out to have a great time,
Yes.
A new adventure.
And was everyone talking to you, giving you ideas about where they were going to go and what they were going to do? Were you formulating a plan on the trip over there, or were you mostly just focusing on the pool and the bed?
I think everyone was just excited to get over to London. We then had to catch a train, or some people hitched. I caught a train from Italy up to London, but most people were just excited to get to London, and then they were going to decide what they were going to do.
So you do your 5 weeks of travel over there. Any contact at home during that time? You can't send letters off the boat, could you?
No, there were letters waiting for me when I got to Naples, and it was via Poste Restante or the American Express offices.
Right.
And Nanny was very good at sending letters, and I was also good at sending letters back home.
So you arrive off the ship, and then they hand you these letters. Where do you go to get the letters?
I went to the major post office, Poste Restante,
Right.
and picked up my letters there.
So the ship, you've done your 5 weeks, you've had your parties, watched the bands, hung by the pool. You arrive in Naples. Talk me through the next few steps.
I went to the youth hostel, and it was quite an eye-opener because it was a triple bunk, and they had grey army blankets chained, cabled to the bed so that people couldn't pinch blankets. And it was a huge big room, like the size of an auditorium, with these triple bunks side by side by side. So there was probably about at least 100 people.
100 people?
100 ladies, females, sleeping in this one dormitory. The showers didn't have any shower curtains. There was no privacy whatsoever. So I remember going to the station to get some spaghetti bolognese. That was my first meal that I had. And
Are you talking
initially,
about you went to a restaurant? Or
the
you
train
went to...
station, the cafe at the train station.
Right, okay, yeah.
Because that was cheap. Somebody had said to me, that's the cheapest place to go for spaghetti and a meal. So I did that. And then I thought, oh, I'm feeling a little bit homesick. So I thought, I'll go to the post office, see if there's any mail at the post office to pick up, and I'll ring home. So I rang home and I spoke for 3 minutes, and apparently there was a beep that I didn't hear to say, you've paid for your phone call home, that's it. But the phone call just kept on going and going. So I spoke to Nanny and Grandad for half an hour. Realised as I walked out I'd left my passport in the booth, went back to get it, and I was nabbed by the security officer to say that I'd only paid for 3 minutes and I'd spoken for over half an hour. And I had to pay some humongous amount of money, otherwise they're going to throw me in jail.
So your very first experience overseas, call home, and you've racked up a massive bill.
I
What are we
know.
talking? Do you have any idea?
Hundreds, it was a lot of money.
Hundreds of dollars?
I think it was hundreds of dollars. And I didn't want to use all of my money, so I said, can I ring Australia and ask my parents to pay for it for me? So at this stage, Nanny and Granddad had jumped the fence and run next door and said, oh, we've just heard from Gail. How exciting is this? And another phone call comes through saying, we have your daughter in custody, and unless you pay this massive bill, we'll put her into jail.
Wow.
So I suppose that was the start of my naivety.
Yes. And so was that a bit of a eye-opening moment for you? You've got to keep your guard up a bit,
yes.
Do you think?
I thought, do not let that passport out of your sight. If I hadn't have had to go back for my passport, I probably would have got away with it.
Wow. And so you get the call home. You had that moment where, you know, they've held you. Were you worried? Did you think for a moment that you might end up in jail or anything?
No, because I think I just knew Nanny and Granddad would pay the money for me. I'm sure I was anxious at the time and thought, oh, what have I done? But I wasn't really that concerned, I don't think.
Fair enough.
Looking back in hindsight now.
Okay, so how many days did you stay in your giant 100-bed dormitory for in Naivety?
I stayed a few days, and then I made my way via train up to London. There was a lady, one of the neighbours, my Nanny and Granddad's neighbours, who lived in the street, had a friend over in Switzerland, and I had her address, so I rang her and she said, yes, come over for a meal, which I did do, but I didn't have any accommodation, so I had to sleep that night on the train station. And a lot of people did in those days because it was a cheap form of accommodation. So
Well, it's not accommodation.
well, I didn't have
just sleeping in a public place.
There was quite a lot of places that you could go to that you're fairly safe in the big waiting rooms that, you know, you could pretend you're waiting for the train the next day.
Right, so that was the assumption. You know, when people came in and said, what are you doing here? You said, I'm on the early morning train.
Yes, correct.
Right. And how long you did the one night?
I did the one. I didn't do that very often because I was a bit nervous about doing that. But I just remember having a really nice meal with this lady. I can't remember her name now. And yes, just making my way back. She didn't offer me to stay the night at her place. So I went back up. I think I was hoping she might have said
that's
stay.
what you're angling for.
Yes, and she didn't. So I just went to the train station and slept that night at the train station.
And the next morning you're on the train up to London?
Yes.
How long's that journey?
I broke it and I stayed a few nights in Paris, loved Paris, and then went up to Dunkirk and then across to London. And I arrived and went to Earl's Court, to the youth hostel there.
And I imagine it would have been a bit different to the old 100
It
or
was.
100 bed dorm in Naples.
It was. I thought at the time that it was quite expensive to stay there. So my thought was pick up my mail, go to, at that stage, Nanny and Grandad were going to send all their letters to Australia House. So I went there, collected my letters, and there was a letter, when I arrived, there was a letter from a girl called Wendy that I'd met on the ship going over, saying that she had a flat in Wimbledon. Give her a call because, maybe we could catch up. So I gave her a call and she said, why don't you come and find a place to live in Wimbledon, and then we can maybe tour, go around Europe together, see what your plans are. So I did that. I found, I couldn't stay with her in her flat at that time, but I found another place to stay. I just rented a room and I looked at getting work and I got nursing work quite quickly.
Right. So you thought, I'll get set up in Wimbledon for a while.
And then get in touch with Rex and catch up with Wendy, and we got on really well together. So we decided that because we'd arrived in November and it was starting to get very cold, we thought that we'd wait until early March, April. I think we set off in April, and we'd tour around Europe. And we thought we might buy a car to do so.
So, when I'm in my early 20s, a bit of a rite of passage for people to go over and live in London, do some work there, save up some money, and then do the European trip. Were there many other Australians around? You're in your early 20s in the 1974 or 5. Were there any other Australians around?
We did meet them, but we made friends mainly with the English people. And Wendy was working at that stage, and someone in her flat moved out, so I moved in to that flat. But I was working nights, and I can always remember the heating went off during the day because they wanted to save money. And I had to put a penny in the slot to heat my room.
While you're sleeping?
While I was sleeping because it was so cold.
Wow. And what about life in the 70s in London? Describe it for me. What were you doing?
We were trying to be very frugal, but we did go to the pub once a week and have a steak meal.
Right.
And that was big time. The rest of the time I remember living on kernels out of the can, and vegetables and bread.
Right.
Toasties.
And what were you doing outside of nursing to keep yourself entertained?
Well, we decided that we'd start doing some day trips, which we did. Went to Buckingham Palace, Tower of London, places like that. And then as it got closer to Christmas, we decided that we'd look at buying a car. So we went back to Australia House, and there was always a queue of Australians wanting to sell their cars that had been around Europe, wanting to sell their cars because they were going back home. So we found two girls, and they had this little minivan, grey minivan, and we fell in love with it.
Yeah.
Didn't worry too much about, how roadworthy it was or how many miles in those days. So we bought this little minivan.
How much was it? Do you remember?
I can't remember. I do remember that we sold it when we were going back home. We sold it for the same amount of money that we bought it for.
Well, there's a good effort. Right.
So we're excited about that.
And was Australia House a bit of a hub? Like, did they have a bar in there or something, or was it just...
No, people would go and collect their mail. There was always ads on a notice board. But it was in the time when the IRA was very active in London, and we had to be frisked every time we went somewhere, like into Australia House, or we went to a concert to see John Denver, and we had to be frisked to go in because of these bombs that were being let off in the London Underground and in all these important places.
So were there bombs going off while you were there?
There were one or two that did go off, mainly in the train station. I don't remember people being injured. I think it was more just as a
Scare tactic.
scare tactic, yes. But there were signs everywhere saying, don't leave any unattended baggage, report any unattended baggage, any suspicious looking people. So we weren't encouraged to congregate at Australia House. Everyone was sort of just not nervous, but I think you were just aware that, you know, something could happen. So
Well, that would have been a big change coming, from Linfield.
it it was indeed, it was.
So you were a bit wary.
Yes, from that point of view, and
Were there any moments, where what was the news cycle like? Did those bombings get back to Australia? Did you ever have Nanny and Granddad, trying to get in contact with you to check in?
I think I always wrote back in a weekly letter just saying that it wasn't as bad as what they might hear,
Right.
just to allay any of their fears.
And was that the truth, or were you just trying to keep them happy?
No, I think it was the truth. I think it was the truth, but it was more just a scare campaign, and it just had everyone being very vigilant when it came to going places.
Right. So you bought your combi van.
Yes.
How long until you head off on your first trip?
I think we bought it just before Christmas, and I remember we went back to Australia House. We made plans with these girls to go back to Australia House to pay them, because we had to get the money, and we drew straws to see who would drive it. And I drew the straw short. And I remember we bought a London A to Z road map book.
Street directory.
Street directory.
Right.
And I was driving, and we got to that big roundabout outside of Buckingham Palace. Now, I'd never seen, we didn't have roundabouts in Australia, in Sydney. And I remember just driving round and round 3 or 4 times, saying to Wendy, how do I get off? What exit do I take? And she's saying, I'm trying to read it, just hang on a minute. And I'm driving round and round until we worked out which exit to take. So that was quite interesting. And the other thing with the car, we'd never filled up with petrol. In Sydney, we had people, we went to the garage and somebody would come out and fill your car up with petrol. So I had to go to the garage and try and work out how to use the Bowser and what to do. And yes, so that.
Did you have a lot of a driving experience? Were you driving around a lot in Sydney?
I just drove from, no, because usually I just drove from work to home.
So it would have been a big shock, a big change.
It was a big
for London
change.
Traffic.
It was a big change, and it was very. The population was much more than out here in Sydney.
Of course, yeah.
It was very. I don't know. I suppose once I got used to it, I didn't worry too much.
So how long did the shortest straw last for? Was it you were going to drive from now on, or you were just going to drive it back to Wimbledon?
I drove it back to Wimbledon, and then Wendy decided we'd take it in turns.
Right.
If we went somewhere, she'd drive, and then I'd drive the next time.
So you had first Christmas away. How was that?
That was. I remember. We found a tree, with, and we decorated it with a few ornaments. And Wendy had made a date loaf. She was really good at making date loaves.
Right.
And I think Nanny had sent a parcel over. I can't remember what it was now. So we did that, and we did go to the pub for Christmas lunch. But in the meantime, I was going backwards and forwards to Rex's house. I'd made contact with them at this stage.
Yeah.
And we had a few meals with them and stayed overnight with them. So yes, that was the first Christmas away.
Wow. And so then big plans for the following year. When were you planning on heading off?
Well, we decided that we'd head off early April. It was just starting to get warm weather. And there again, I drew the short straw and had to drive off the ferry into Normandy, and of course had to drive on the wrong side of the road.
Right. So before we get to that, just tell me. So you had 4 months in London. Did you get up? Did you do many Londoner type things? You told me that you saw John Denver at a concert. Anything else that you remember that from that time?
Probably just seeing all the sights, going on day trips up to Oxford, going to Hampton Court, going to Stonehenge, places like that.
Yes.
Um, there wasn't a real social scene that I remember. It was mainly just doing the touristy
Yes.
things.
Yeah, and save up your money for your trip.
Saving it, yes, and living as cheaply as we could.
Yes. So what was your plan? Don't tell me about the trip yet. What was your plan? Where was you in April? Where were you going to go?
I think we're just going to drive to France and get off the boat or the ship and just drive.
See what happened. Sounds like a recurring theme.
We had a map. We went and bought a really big map, and we thought, well, we'll just drive down around and see how we go. We wanted to go and see all the touristy things like the Eiffel Tower and all those sort of things, but there was no plan of what countries. We just thought we'd see how we went.
Well, I think that's a good point to say. We'll pause here for this episode, and then we'll catch up next time and find out where you did go.
Sounds like a plan.
Thanks, Ma.